Are we started, Cody?
It's loading. 1 second. The live stream is getting started. All right, the live stream seems to be frozen, so just give me 1 second. If you'd like to start, I can just work on that while you're
No, I'll give it a minute or
adopting
two
the
because I think were you able to send Sean the invite as well?
He said he joined as a member of the public.
Okay. I'll just give it a minute or two. That's no problem.
That's mine.
We're recording it. Just the live stream on YouTube was taking a second, and now it's live, so you're good.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to the June 25th, 2020 meeting of the Manhattan Community Board 6 Business Affairs and Street Activities Committee. My name is Kyle Athaide, and I am the chair of the committee. This meeting is called to order at 6:37 p.m. And tonight we are joined by Assistant District Manager Cody Osterman and Community Associate Brendan Berth. Members of the public, you can raise any questions or comments that you have through the question and answer feature of Zoom. If there is time following the committee's discussion, we will field questions from the public. Tonight, Matt Bondi has volunteered to take minutes. We will now take attendance by roll call. Cody, can you please conduct the roll call?
Sure. Right. Kyle Athaide.
Here.
Matt Bondi.
He's muted.
I'm here. I'm here. Thank you.
Dan Devine. Has Dan joined? Doesn't look like it. No. All right. Jeannie D'Onofrio.
Hello, I'm here.
All right. Paige Judge. Paige was here a moment ago.
Paige, you're still on mute.
Here.
Great. Thank you. Yusef Khalid.
I'm here.
John Keller. Has John joined? Did he respond to you, Kyle?
I do not see a response.
Can I make a voice memo of this or something?
Kathleen Kelly.
Here.
Yeah.
Anton Malner is not. He said he wasn't coming. Kevin O'Keefe said he would be late. Has he joined? Kevin?
No, Kevin's not making it tonight.
Okay. Frank Scala said he couldn't make it. Seema Shaw?
Here.
And Susan Steinberg.
Here.
All right. You've got 8 members present, which is a quorum.
Fantastic. All right. The agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and appears on the screen before you. I made a slight adjustment to the agenda, which was to include point number 1, which was originally as part of number 2, but I think with everything that's been going on in the last couple of days, it warrants its own agenda item. So I've amended it to include the first item as discussion on enforcement of social distancing, and everything else follows the same as was distributed. If there's no objection, we will adopt the agenda as stated. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the agenda, please raise your hand through Zoom. Okay, seeing no objections, the agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. The minutes from the May 28th meeting were distributed ahead of time by the board office. If there is no objection, we will adopt these minutes. Committee members, if you object to adopting the minutes, you may raise your hand through Zoom. Seeing no objections, the minutes from the May 28th meeting are adopted. They will soon be available on the CB6 website. So just some ground rules for discussion. In order to conduct an efficient meeting, let's observe a few ground rules. No one may speak until granted the floor. Committee members, if you have a question about committee business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand through Zoom. If you click the participants icon, the participants panel should appear and you should find the raise hand function there. If you still have technical difficulty, you may click the chat icon and relay your difficulty. A reminder, the chat function should not be used for committee business or questions about agenda topics. All remarks must be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us to any technical difficulties you're having or to state in writing information, like an email address, that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. When a committee member is given the floor to speak, I will identify you and you can unmute yourself so that you can speak. We are required by executive order to create a verbatim transcript of the meeting, so please keep your questions and comments succinct and germane to the discussion. So I'd like to begin with agenda item number 1, which is the discussion of enforcement of social distancing. So to provide some context to this, over the last week or so, the board office and myself have received a number of different complaints and emails regarding various establishments throughout the district. No particular region has been higher than the other. It's just been pretty widespread of large gatherings, people not complying with social distancing guidelines, for example, face masks or maintaining 6 feet of distance. So this has become an issue. You might have seen some of the news articles about it or have been on an email chain or anything of that nature about the enforcement of social distancing. So what I wanted to do is, because as you know, my mantra is about being proactive, I would like to come up with some ideas as to how this should be enforced. One of the members of the district, not a community board member, but just a member of the public, contacted us and said that they initially called 311. They also called the police as well, and the police responded that it's not under their jurisdiction. I'm also not inclined to have police enforcing social distancing with everything that's going on. I'm not sure that it makes the most sense. But there's a lot of hot potato being played around. Technically, this is under the jurisdiction of the SLA, but the SLA obviously has a very limited number of investigators who would be the people to enforce this for the state. This is also under jurisdiction of Department of Transportation, and also for sidewalk cafes in the past, it's always been under the jurisdiction of Department of Consumer Affairs. So I wanted to start a discussion to see how we can think this through, if there's some ideas that we can come up with as a committee to present to the full board as to how social distancing can be enforced in a safe and productive and community-driven way. And so I'll just open up the discussion there. If anyone has something to say or some ideas, and just, there's no parameters for this right now. We're just thinking of ideas. So any stream of conscience discussion is welcomed.
Kyle.
If you have something to, please raise your hand. Yep, Matt.
Yeah. Do you want us to raise our hand On the video like I just did, or through the app?
So I happen to see you, but if you can raise it on the on Zoom itself, that is helpful for me because I can see everyone who wants to speak. I can only see your face when you decide to speak.
Okay. Well, you know, I just had a couple thoughts. I was out yesterday, mask on, of course, socially distancing as best I could with my family. And I have to tell you, I was heartened to see New York buzzing back to life with some restaurants that were open in my neighborhood with their tables set up outside and even in the curb lane for parking and everything else. And it got me thinking because I've experienced the gatherings in front of certain bars. And I had to navigate my way through it. And people would see me coming with my daughter on her bicycle, and they were respectful about it. And you would have somebody say, all right, everybody move, make way, you know. But it got, yesterday, seeing the way that the restaurants were set up outside, there was a clear corridor for pedestrians to make it through those tables, whether they were up against the wall or out at the curb or in the street, in the parking lane. So I think that it's only reasonable to ask that bars that are serving, or bars, I guess, or restaurants who are serving through their open windows, delineate a path for pedestrians and confine their patrons to the particular areas defined by tape or whatever it is on the sidewalk. And in that way, people can make it through and everybody knows, where they should be standing with their drinks and where they shouldn't be, so that people can make it through without having to, weave their way in and out of people. Because I can tell you too, when people are out in the street with drinks in their hands, they're not wearing a mask, they're drinking.
Right.
So, that's another issue too. It's, you have to kind of get up close with people who aren't wearing a mask. So that was just consciousness there for what it's worth.
Oh, that's great.
Anyway.
My experience has been similar. I don't think anyone is out there out of malice. I don't think anyone is out there purposely trying to get people sick or anything of that nature. The issue is at the end, and I've been cycling around the place, so this is my experience, and just kind of getting a sense of what's going on in the district. I've seen a lot of people with the sidewalks actually have barriers to make sure that there's certain areas for people to dine. The issue becomes when people start to overflow, or when people are so, actually, it's pretty much the same thing, are so happy that New York City is reopening that it kind of is throwing caution to the wind and not really remembering what the public health guidelines are, what the CDC and WHO and all the other health authorities have been suggesting to ensure that we don't have another surge of this virus. The point is and this is why I'm throwing it to the committee as well for input. Even if we come up with a system where, for example, Matt, you just proposed having a certain corridor for pedestrians, et cetera. If a business refuses to comply with that, if pedestrians, customers refuse to comply with that too, whose authority does that then go under to enforce public safety guidelines? And so that's where I'm thinking a bunch of things through. And I don't even know if, it's within our capacity to come up with an entire system, but I would be happy if we could do that. But that's where my thinking is too, is even if we come up with a system that says, hey, this is what you should be doing, and through the rest of the agenda tonight, we'll see some ideas that I've put together for us to discuss. But who actually enforces that? Who will then make sure that these businesses and customers are then obeying that those guidelines? And that's where I'm really trying to think things through. So Susan, I saw your hand up.
Yeah.
And then Jeannie.
Okay. Kyle, I'm coming at it from a really different place. I'm kind of not convinced that we should be responsible for determining social distancing enforcement. And the reason I say that is based on the experience here in Stuyvesant Town. Despite management coming out with a policy, we have this large oval where people like to congregate. And there have been incidents where large groups of people get together and you have the feeling it's not just families when there are 40 of them, you know what I mean? Like probably friends and whatever celebrating. And the response when our public safety, we have a public safety department that's ancillary to the police. When they go and tell people to, you know, mind social distancing, the pushback is not very pleasant. People curse at them and they tell them to mind their business and not in those terms. And, you know, I don't think the police have enough policemen. I don't think the city agencies have enough personnel to try to enforce this. You know, this is really, to me, it's continual education. And you can't, I just don't think you can force people who think they have the right, or, you know, they don't have the response. They want freedom without the responsibility, you know.
Right.
They want to not have to wear the mask and not think about potential consequences.
Yeah.
So I really, I don't know what to say other than I don't know that it's for us to make this decision.
No, fair point. I mean, that's one of the things that Brendan, Cody, and I were discussing before the meeting started, as, you know, more of these complaints are coming in by email. Is this just something like jaywalking, or, you know, where there's something on the books that says you shouldn't be doing it, but people still do it, and, you know, there's no real enforcement? One of, you know, I was on an email chain earlier with another member of the board who also submitted a complaint about some bars that were open, but also made a really great point with everything that's going on with, you know, enforcing laws, and then, you know, the different experiences by different racial groups to the enforcement of law. Is there consistency with this as well throughout the city? So if we're enforcing this, are we enforcing it through all neighborhoods throughout the city? If we're not enforcing it, are we not enforcing it throughout all the cities? And we saw some of this with the face coverings, where we saw certain, you know, parks in outer boroughs, which are more heavily minorities, people being arrested for not, you know, abiding by social distancing, but seeing the police then give out masks to people in the West Village, where they were also breaking rules. So there's also this component of whatever we end up, or whatever the city ends up doing, are we consistent in our application of it? Are we consistent in our enforcement of it as well? So Jeannie, you're next.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So I'm kind of like in the middle of what Matt had said and Susan. I too live in Stuyvesant town and I've experienced that. This whole idea of social distancing and masks, is, as you know, has been politicized. And so it's you know, by some people. And as progressive as New York City is, there's still, you know, those who do not think that this virus is real and everything else. And so it's really hard to police everyone. But what Matt said struck me. Maybe it's just guidance that these establishments really need and that they don't have, like a collective voice through a campaign, through proper posters or signage, or, you know, everybody gets a set of stickers that they can place, you know. So some people are just doing this ad hoc and, you know, just trying to get their businesses open. But if they had a helping hand on just that, you know, how they can organize themselves outside without their staff worrying about policing people. But if we can help them with a positive message, with some positive materials, it's all pretty much standard. It's all, you know, everything looks the same. The message is the same across the board. So it's not, again, like, you know, different signage, different stickers, and people start to follow a system. So yeah, I think it's really tough for us, you know, to kind of step in and mandate, or, you know, force, and I mean, even staff members or people who work in these restaurants, it's hard all the way around. We want to be open, but maybe just some kind of a positive message could help.
Yeah. No, that's a really great point too. And that's actually what my second agenda item is for tonight, which is why actually I split these up in two, because originally it was just about consumer responsibilities. So we'll discuss later something I put together, which I'm just, you know, in terms of a draft, calling a consumer bill of responsibilities. So I have a couple of points, and that's something I think, you know, that we can continue to share. And I agree that it's more about public education and making sure that people are making smart decisions. Kathleen, I see your hand up.
Kathleen, you're muted. Please unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. I was just thinking that we're also talking about people, I mean, it's been going really well, but in general, people's judgment doesn't necessarily get better as they're ingesting alcohol. So like, that's kind of like something I was thinking about as we were talking. And then I was thinking, well, what have other countries been doing as they're opening their bars and restaurants? They just got rid of the masks and they just have social distancing now, or that's a second point. And then, yeah, in Peter Cooper's Stuytown, people are just not wearing masks and they're out and they sit on the lawn and they drink. And, you know, you see how the different populations have been affected. And then, you know, if you spent a lot of time with people that have died from COVID, you have a different point of view. So it's all, you know, like a campaign of education and engaging, you know, like the stakeholders, the people at the social establishments, you know, how they think they could communicate to people. So I definitely think the police don't need any more problems right now. They have enough stuff to focus on right now. And when you add alcohol into the mix, it just gets worse when you have to add the police and authority figures with people. Yeah. So I would definitely try to stay away from that. And we're talking about the entire city and enforcement. And here we are, we're just a community board and enforcement. Right. If we just start in our little microcosm of how do we engage the establishments that are here, you know, and compared to what's going on in the rest of Europe as they were starting to open things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did a little bit of research on what was being done in Europe and in some Asian countries even, and it seemed like that they were initially very, very strict about it. There was some police enforcement, and as we've actually, I don't know if any of you have seen any of the pictures of some of these establishments that have reopened where they've literally had bubbles for people to sit inside. I don't know that we're going in that direction, but I think because initially the pandemic hit them so hard that they were very strict in the beginning and were able to gradually reopen to that. And for us, I mean, throughout the country, we're a little late to that pandemic, to that surge. And so it's a little difficult in our process to go at a gradual rate, especially when some things end up being open and others don't. Yusuf, I see your hand. Oh, do you have a follow-up to that, Kathleen? You're on mute. You're still on mute, Kathleen.
My button. Sorry about that. Looking at other countries that have a homogeneous population is really tough to compare for like the US.
I agree.
You know?
I agree. Mm-hmm. Yusuf.
Yeah, thank you. I think I agree with a lot of what folks have said. I think, you know, we don't want to put certain city agencies or law enforcement in a position to fail, especially at like such a critical time. And, you know, one of the hard parts is that a lot of businesses are feeling like the last week, to the point that Matt shared earlier of like life coming back to the streets as their lifeline for surviving, for getting through the next month or so. So I think a combination, having said that, I don't think we should be kind of misleading about this. At the end of the day, you need to wear a mask if you cannot social distance, and that's typically 6 feet. And I think a combination of education, but also, and this might be controversial, but public shaming or public accountability, where, you know, if we aggregate data on known places that are consistently a problem and begin to publish it or share it, just like we try to elevate restaurants that have reopened and that we want to tell people, hey, this is open for business, there might also be an opportunity to be able to publish and share data on an ongoing basis that says, here are the businesses in the district that consistently have these issues. These are the hotspots, if you will. Share that with the city. Of course, the city, I'm sure, is getting its own 311 data. so that people recognize, like we've done on an individual basis, you don't want to stick out like a sore thumb as being sort of like the guy who's not wearing his mask or the block that's kind of being crappy about this. So those are my two.
And customers might be fearful to go to a place where they think public health isn't being followed.
Exactly right.
Seema, I don't know if you can speak to this a little bit, but I think you had mentioned on a previous meeting that you were working on something or were aware of something that was similar to what Yusuf just mentioned. I think you did described it as like a Yelp type program. Would you be able to speak a little bit about that? Or
it's actually it's not something we're working on. Our agency doesn't. I work at a state agency. We don't have any purview over this area. It's just something that we've heard the Department of Health share with us that they have come across, which is essentially a Yelp for COVID for restaurants. But that is really about how restaurants are equipping their workers and preparing food and managing curbside either pickup, delivery, or seating. That's actually more about the operations of the restaurant. And I feel personally, my take on the challenges right now are customer behavior and less restaurant behavior.
I agree.
Yeah, so I don't know if I think the Yelp for businesses would work, or restaurants, because that's about if the business is doing all it needs to do essentially. But even if the business is doing all it needs to do, which I'm not actually saying it is 100% of the time, I've definitely seen a lot of tables placed very close together, and if you push your seat out, you're back to back with people, but you're actually still pretty close. I mean, so there's some operational stuff the restaurants can do, but otherwise I think a lot of it's customer behavior that we're trying to mitigate for.
Yeah, no, I agree. I saw it was on the Lower East Side again. I was cycling through there, and I saw they had their sidewalk cafes out, and there was a party of people, and I think it might have been 5 people or so, and they pulled a chair from another table, and the manager actually immediately came out and said, hey, we're actually not allowed to do that. We have to make sure that there's proper social distancing and the proper amount of seats for each. So that was actually really great to see, that the businesses themselves, and I mean, they have every incentive to comply with everything, just because economically everything is so devastating that people want to, at least the business owners want to comply with all of the public health guidelines and make it work. Yeah, so I just want to, there are 2 comments from people who are unable to utilize their audio, so I'll just read it out loud. So from Sean, it says, is there a way to incorporate this with the restaurant grading that already exists? So I'm not sure exactly if that's something that could be incorporated with the restaurant grading. I think it goes back to the point that other people have made about overextending agencies to conduct work that they may not be able to do as it is. I'm sure at some point that it might go as gradings start to be reevaluated, that will be part of the equation. But that's a great point. I think that's something that further down the road we can incorporate. And then Kathleen, do you want to just ask your question?
No, I just thought, I'm not a big tech person. I just thought an app for something like how you have ways for traffic that, ways for social distancing, the way that you were saying, give people ratings that, if you're looking, you can have an app to know, this place is okay, this place is not, if you're concerned about social distancing.
Yeah, I was also thinking about if anyone uses City Bike, the way they show which docks are congested and which aren't. They have the green for where there are a bunch of bikes that you can go to, and then red for where there are no bikes. That could be something as well. Jeannie, I see your hand up.
Hi again. Just something about that. With this social distancing and these issues, to me, I think these things happen spontaneously, then they go away. So I think when you start operationalizing and, kind of like a Yelp or a Waze, or I think it punishes a restaurant it could punish a restaurant unnecessarily, because it could be that one moment where a bunch of friends show up and are not doing the right thing, and somebody pulls in and says, this is horrible. And then the restaurant now suffers, as you said,
Mm-hmm.
you know, Kyle, that, you know, they're trying to come back from this. So I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
I mean, this is always like a kind of in the moment thing. I don't think this happens like all the time, the same place. Look at St. Mark's, what happened a couple of weeks ago. I mean, you wouldn't be caught dead the next day on St. Mark's, but now if you went there today, it's back to where it was. It's not, the crowds are gone and the restaurants are doing the right thing.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Does anyone else have anything to say on this? I see that there are a couple of guests who are not part of the committee. Does anyone have anything to say or any questions to ask or any input?
It looks like Matt is raising his hand.
Sorry, not through the app
in the
again.
frame.
Sorry about that.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and also I think it's also important to understand and consider that it's only been, you know, not a whole lot of time since since we've started to open up. And certainly there are going to be some places that are more crowded than others. But this is also a necessity for a lot of our small businesses in order to get back up and running, in order to continue to employ people. And I think somebody mentioned it's a lifeline. And it's something that's going to be around until, as far as I understand, through October, right? I mean, isn't that what the street guidelines that have been issued recently call for? Right. That they're effective only through October. So when you think about it, you know, there's July, August, September, and October. So I think a lot of this is also going to be playing it by ear and seeing how things go. I read reports about the SLA threatening to pull liquor licenses from establishments that weren't compliant with social distancing and everything else. And so to the extent that there's enforcement, you know, again, I'm kind of torn between the whole thing too. Like Susan said, kind of in the middle, because I don't, you know, everybody's has enough on their plate than to go around and enforce this, and perhaps it's an SLA thing. You know, the SLA has inspectors, the SLA can take complaints, and the SLA can, you know, put its resources where they're necessary to investigate violations of social distancing. So those are just my last thoughts on it. That it's not a lot of time that you're talking about, but it's so important, and it's certainly going to be more problematic in some places than others, but perhaps the SLA might be the best to take it up.
Okay. Kathleen?
Yeah, when you brought the point, when you brought the point up about St. Mark's being different than it was the other day, I don't know if it is in regards to any of the marches being crowded because of that, but I'm thinking, what's the difference between when it was safe and wasn't safe? How did it get safe?
You're talking about the issue that happened the other week? Like, how did it go from the parade to not a parade?
Right, like, was it businesses that made it safe, or it's just the people just aren't there, that's why it's safe?
So, I mean, it was a combination of things. So for those who are unfamiliar, although I'm sure everyone is, there was a viral video that went out in the East Village in the St. Mark's area where it was essentially like Bourbon Street. There was a band out in the street and just complete overflow. And there was a lot of, public reaction to that. The governor even tweeted about it, saying that he'll push us back in the reopening phase. And, he made some humor out of it to not be too strict. But essentially what he was saying was, I'll have to enforce it at the state level and it might put us back in reopening. And I think, at least from my discussions with the businesses around there, even though it's out of our district, a lot of them are upset with all of those businesses because they said, you know what, this is ruining for all of us. If they continue to do something like that, then we're all going to remain closed for longer. It just doesn't make any fiscal sense. And I think it kind of lit a fire under them where people are like, okay, we can't go this crazy again. But it is in the same area that I do see a lot of the overflow on the street. So I will mention that along 2nd Avenue.
No, I just thought, how do you know, like, how do you connect and capture some of the energy like that, reproduce that network of communication among the businesses to, you know, it's kind of like they police themselves and solve the problem.
Right. So yeah, so I mean, we've been in, as I mentioned before, I've been working with Community Board 8 on these workshops that we put out. Hopefully you've been attending them. The purpose of them is that they're a series of workshops to help educate business owners, consumers, workers about, you know, reopening and how to properly do all of that. So on those calls are bids. So we've been in contact with the bids. That's the easiest way to get in touch with everybody, but it's very hard to get in touch with the, you know, the small restaurant or the small, you know, cafe that's around the corner. So it's been mostly public education. I mean, as the second part of this agenda tonight, I am trending in a more of a public education campaign type thing. That is, you know, something that we could do as a resolution. We don't have to come up with a solution, but we could put something forth that says, you know, this has been an issue. Can the state liquor authority, or we send it to the, you know, to the state level or the city level and say, can there be, you know, a system put in place that ensures that consumers are educated about the proper guidelines and responsibilities. So that's something to think about. But are there any other points to be made about on this social distancing, the enforcement of it? Because I think it does transition really well into our second item. So please raise your hand if you have anything else to say about item 1, which is the discussion of public enforcement. Jim, did you say something? Did I hear you, Jim?
No, I didn't say anything.
Oh, okay. All right, so
I do have a question on that though. Insofar as the street, just the expansion onto the streets, a restaurant near me has taken up like probably 3 or 4 parking spaces onto 3rd Avenue and blocked it off. I'm just wondering if that has been approved by anybody, the city council or the district. Is that standard procedure?
Right. So Cody, maybe you want to go more into depth on this, but essentially right now there's a self-certification process with the Department of Transportation. So presumably anybody who is utilizing any street space or parking space, as you mentioned, has gotten approval through the Department of Transportation. That's how the system has been working insofar as, you know, the first couple of weeks of reopening. So it has been done through Department of Transportation.
Okay, I just didn't see any signs or approvals or permits or anything like that. So I'm just curious.
Right.
Jim, when they, first a question, is this establishment occupying the roadbed in the parking lane only in front of their establishment or into adjacent, what would be adjacent?
No, it's just the roadbed parking spaces in front of their restaurant.
Okay, so they are assuming that they've gone through the self-certification process, which the DOT has set up. They are permitted, but that process does result in them, it generates some paperwork that they're supposed to display, both to close off the parking spots and also, you know, in the window of the establishment, kind of informing the public. So if you didn't see that, just send us an email with the name of the.
Okay, I'll check it out. You know, I just did a brief glance. I figured something was going on with it that was approved, but I didn't see any certification, so I thought I'd raise it.
And on that point, I mean, a couple of us on this committee, and I definitely know the board office, were on a call or a Zoom with the Manhattan Borough President's office last week, which pulled in some city agencies into it as well to discuss how reopening is going. And obviously this is to be expected. Of course, there's going to be some confusion going forth. This is unprecedented. We're trying to organize. But the city did mention that they are working on transparency and education and making sure that everyone is aware of who's applying for spaces and who's getting approved and not. So they are working on that. That's not something that they're not doing. It's just that with the rollout, which as you can imagine is very overwhelming for agencies that are already overextended, it's taking a little bit to make sure that it's organized and properly organized. So
that's fine. That's fine. Thank you.
No problem. So any other questions or comments on this first agenda item before moving on? Raise your hand if you have anything. All right, seeing none. Brendan, can you put up the draft that I sent you?
Sure.
So as I was mentioning at the top of this meeting, one of the things that I just put a draft together is what I'm just tentatively calling like a consumer bill of responsibilities. This is something that very similar to how we, when we were meeting with applicants for liquor licenses or sidewalk cafes and asked them to display signage to, if the public had any comments to speak to the manager, et cetera. I figured, we could do something else that has to do with public education. Again, I call it a consumer bill of responsibilities because it's not necessarily illegal, but it is, some of these things are mandated, and some businesses have the rights to actually enforce these things. So I wanted to share it with everyone else to see if this is worth, putting together, if this is something you think would be helpful. Obviously, we would share this through our social media, through our contacts, and maybe, share with our electeds as well if they, need help putting something together. But essentially, I put this together. These are the things that I just gathered from the state's reopening guidelines, from the city's reopening guidelines, and just kind of whittled down to about 8 points. And this is basically to help educate, again, the consumer about things that you should know before you walk into a space. Because one of the things that I'm trying to avoid in anticipation is people going into certain places of businesses. And then, as you mentioned, a lot of, unfortunately, public health guidelines have been politicized in such a way that there are tensions there. There are pushbacks against it. So making sure that before someone comes in, very similar to our guidelines for applicants coming before a board, making sure that they're aware before going in what is required of them, what are some proper behaviors, what are healthy behaviors, what would be compliant, and just making sure that everyone is educated before going in to avoid any potential conflicts. So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on this, if there are things that in terms of organization or purpose even, or things that should be added or missing, please let me know. I can read through it very quickly if people would need that, if that would be helpful. Jeannie, I see your hand up.
Hi, Kyle, just a question. How are you thinking of presenting this? Is this something how do you publish this? Are you giving this to restaurants or your website? Like where is this going to go above and beyond what they can pull from, the New York State, New York City websites?
So part of this became because this is published information, but it is somewhat difficult to get to. I don't imagine many people going through the reopening plans to look at what is mandatory and what is not mandatory. So the way I envision this, and again, I'll put this forward to the committee as well for your thoughts, is of course we have the low-hanging fruit, which is to put this up on our website as part of our resources. We already have a list of resources for businesses, for economic recovery, all of that. This can also be included on that. We've been active on social media as well, so making sure that this is at the top of our socials to be shared around. And then if we want to take it from there, this is something that we can share with our elected officials as well. Obviously we have great active council members, assembly members, state senators, and congressional members. So this is something that we can send to them as well, and have them send out to their constituencies and to their mailing lists as well. And I mean, the hope is that at some point, whether it's utilizing this or some other, sort of, document, is actually having the city educated the same way that, we're educated about other things for public health, to actually have this shared around. And this is something, this is obviously a draft, but formatted in such a way that this is something easily a business can print and just post to the, front of their door, or if someone else wants to put it up somewhere else, just to kind of have this be very shareable and simple. And figured, as the Business Affairs Committee, we're not only about, businesses, but also about community and making sure that consumers are protected and are aware of what's going on, because a lot of people don't. There are so many conflicting things. For example, in my building, it's mandated that you wear a mask when you're out in the hallway or if you're going to the lobby, but it is not mandated outside technically if you're at least 6 feet apart. So there's a lot of confusion as to what is and isn't allowed. So I figured that this might be a good way to educate people in a simple way. And Jeannie, your hand is still up.
One more thing. I think if you did something like that was like branded, so it looks the same and people know where to look for it, it becomes kind of like, it becomes muscle memory, or they just see it all the time and they know what the rules are. Just thinking about my building in Stuyvesant Town, they had the signage up, they've been up, they all look the same. And after a while, it starts to become embedded in me, like, all right, the elderly live here, I've got to be careful to know only one family per time, in the elevator at a time. So if you put this up and it looks the same and it's branded, it's just a constant reminder. And businesses, if they could just, print up this colorful, nice looking sheet, it'll just be easier for them.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the idea. So this is not what it would look like. This is just the content of what would be included. Obviously, I'd work with the board office and anyone else who's interested in making it aesthetically pleasing and easy to capture. I mean, I've seen throughout the city actually just, I don't know what to call, like vigilantes maybe, but basically people have just posted up stuff on trees and fences who are not associated with any organization, just kind of being like, hey, like, keep your masks on. And I thought that was such a really, like, cute and really nice thing, and really community driven thing that was low hanging fruit, but also a constant reminder to people like, oh, like, I should keep my mask on, to the point that, like, before I leave my house, it's in my mind, like, oh, do I have my keys? Do I have my wallet? Do I have my mask? And I think this is something, as you mentioned, Jeannie, that would be good to have in people's minds. Susan and then Kathleen. Susan, you're still muted.
I know. It took me a while to find that. I was thinking that usually when you make a reservation, you end up giving your mobile number to the restaurant. It would be kind of an interesting thing if restaurants automatically texted to everybody who made a reservation the consumer responsibilities guidelines.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, and that was something that the Restaurant Row East Alliance was talking about too, that if they were to implement their reservation system, that part of the registration would be you have to comply with X, Y, and Z. So that's a really great point. Kathleen?
I guess two things. If you don't have a mask, are establishments gonna provide you with a mask? And then is there like a supply? Do they have to pay each establishment for masks? Does the city provide masks to businesses to send out?
So this is a good point, and this is actually part of the third agenda item. But so right now, businesses are not required to provide masks to those who do not have masks. Essentially, they have the right to refuse service until that person does get a mask. So that's how it is now. I am not aware of any program that would provide businesses with masks at the city level. That is something that we could propose if the committee is so interested in providing a resolution to make sure businesses are supported and the consumers are supported. That would be a great idea, I think. Obviously, with a lot of these ideas, we might be fearful, like, oh, okay, well, they might be overextended, et cetera. But there's nothing wrong with making sure that these ideas get on people's tables, which to me is the point of a resolution. At the end, we're advisory. And however we can get, a spotlight on these issues or ideas and allow the policymakers to create the policy, I'm always for. So that could be something if someone wants to make a motion or if is interested in pursuing that, I'd be interested in that as well. Matt, I think I see you raising your hand.
Yes, thanks, Kyle. So wouldn't this be something that we resolve to ask the Department of Health to opine on and then uniformly brand for use by restaurants or consumer establishments to download and then post? Because it's, on the one hand, I mean, I think it's good. All of this is ingrained in my mind already, but we aren't subject matter experts either. And to the extent that there might be more, I would think that the health department would be the ones. And then as an arm or a branch of the city government that's putting out guidance, I would think that before we did that, the health department would want to look at it and see and vet it. So, if in my, I'm thinking that, if this is to move forward with some sort of resolution, then perhaps it should be that the health department provide or come up with a uniform set of guidelines for consumers to follow that can, be used for consumer establishments along the lines of including what's in this proposed draft and anything else that it might find appropriate.
Yeah, so excellent point. So two responses to that. So the first thing is that this is actually comprised of everything that the City Department of Health and the State Department of Health have published. So this is all verified. This isn't just, through observation. But the second point is I agree. I think this should be coming from the Department of Health. But one of the reasons that I just threw this together was because a lot of this is time sensitive, and a lot of, at least the emails that I'm getting and the board office is getting have been very contentious about public health guidelines and who's enforcing it and why aren't people complying with it. And so I thought that, those aren't mutually exclusive, your proposals, Matt, that we could put a resolution together to request Department of Health to put together a set of uniform guidelines that should be printable or sent to each business or accessible to every business, maybe through their council members, I don't know, where people can post signage that demonstrates all of these important public health guidelines. At the same time, I don't think it would be wrong to also put this together and, have it available through community board saying, these are, consumer responsibilities that you should have in mind, because there's nothing non-factual about it. There's nothing that's not approved by the health departments on either level. But it would be something that we could put forth right away, because with a resolution, we would then have to get it approved by full board or executive, because we're in the summer session, and then have that go through whoever gets it on their plate. So yeah, I would love to do both, actually. Seema, I see your hand up.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say is that the Department of Health, when they issued their, actually not even the Department of Health on the governor's website, though I'm sure the Department of Health pulled it together, is like they do actually have these well-designed posters that restaurants are encouraged to put up in their establishments, like already done for the different phases. And so they have things you can put up during phase 1, phase 2, etc. So maybe we just want to talk about bringing more awareness to that if that's not, but I feel like if you're in the industry, you probably know about it. And, I just wanted to kind of raise that here.
Sure. Yeah. So part of this too is because a lot of businesses, particularly on the workshops, who have said that it has been confusing for them, that they're not aware of it, or they just don't have the governmental literacy to navigate that. Even for me, I'm aware of the sample plans that the templates that they've created for plans. I think it's called the safety plan template or whatever it is, but I'm not aware of actually signs that go through consumer responsibility. So if that's something that exists, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. And we should definitely be sharing that. So if you can share that with me, that'd be great. But I think there's definitely this need for education to everybody on this, particularly business owners, and they're probably more versed on this than consumers are. Just the average person who's going out for food or drinks or anything like that. So yeah, if that's something that we can help foster, that's really where the intent of this is behind. Jim, I see your hand up too.
Yeah, just I noticed here on the third one, I think it is, where you're saying keep your face mask on whenever entering a business and at all times, which would make it kind of difficult when we are in a phase when the restaurants are actually able to take people inside. I mean, when we change as we're cycling through all this and we dealing with all these different phases, I think, and I agree. I guess it was with Matt that probably this is in the purview of the Department of Health, and I'm surprised they haven't issued something so far. They really should be. But it should be, it should be subject to or dependent on which phase we're in. So we might be in phase 3 next week, in which case some of this stuff is going to go by the wayside. And the other thing is, I don't use the hand sanitizer. I wear gloves, which is not recommended by the CDC, but I find that when I'm outside and I need to do something with my face, perhaps push my eyeglasses back or, just scratch my nose, I prefer to do that barehanded. And, So
for those, who can't see, Cody put some links to some signage at the city level, which are actually really great. I like the second one, particularly with the socialize responsibly. So I've actually not seen these anywhere at all. And it was put together by the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment through the Office of Nightlife. So these are, this is great right here. But I do think at the same time, there needs to be something from the Department of Health as well, some kind of education or guidance or, I was reaching out in March even repeatedly if there were some kind of webinars or public education on this, because signage is good and branding is good, but there's also this idea of what are your actual responsibilities and then what can businesses do in response to that. So that's one of the big things too, is that there needs to be this idea of, and to me, this is again about avoiding conflicts of any kind. If a business says you're not allowed to come in here and, which was mentioned again, face masks strangely have become politicized. And so avoiding that, but just making sure that people are educated that, hey, a business is legally allowed to refuse you service if you are not complying with all of this. So, yeah. Yeah, and the city has some good posters too. Thanks for sharing that.
Kyle, Brendan's going to just show those for everyone. If
perfect.
Click the link, just give him a moment.
Yeah, I'm looking at a couple of them now.
Yeah, and I've not seen these anywhere on any establishment or even the kiosks. Yeah.
This is one of the posters. I can toggle to the other one in a moment.
Yeah, can you just go through it?
Deputy Mayor for Nightlife. I guess he's finally earning his $125,000 a year salary.
Yeah, this is the one I really like.
Which one is that? Oh,
it's called Socialize Responsibly. Yeah, because this goes into the detail I was looking for.
We could reach out to the Office of Nightlife and see if they've been printing these on posters.
Distributing.
Yeah.
I mean, you can at least distribute them and have the businesses print them. And I'm sure they have email addresses for pretty much every business in the city.
Yeah, and they're available in other languages too, and have other ones for grocery stores and program flyers. Yeah, I didn't know this existed, so thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I personally haven't seen them on Wi-Fi kiosks. Someone asked a question. I actually haven't seen them in public anywhere. Granted, I have not been on trains, so I don't know if they're up in the MTA at all, but I have not seen it on the street or kiosks or even in businesses, but this should be up on businesses. Mm-hmm. All right. I mean, I think we've discussed this agenda item pretty well. Is there any, I know there was some mention of asking, putting a resolution to request some kind of campaign or public education campaign or anything like that. Is there any interest in that from anybody?
I'm not in the committee, but I support it.
Yeah, if you have an interest in that, because I know it's mentioned by a couple of people, if you have any interest in that, please raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll just move on to the next agenda item.
Raise hand in reality or on Zoom?
On your in the Zoom, but you have to be of the committee.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
All right. So seeing none, let's just move on to the next agenda item. I think this is just something that we could probably do through email. Is just ask our electeds to share this with the community and email us and things like that. So Brendan, could you put up the first link that I shared with you?
For the CBS news link?
I think it's the price gouging one.
Okay, just give me a moment. Yeah, this should be the one.
Yep, that's the one, yeah. So for those who haven't been aware, Susan was actually talking to me about this because at the time this was popping up in other areas of the country, but it's now popping up here in New York City. But there are some businesses that are adding a COVID-19 surcharge to their prices, to their bills, and not all consumers are aware of this. So things that were original prices, some people have been unaware about being extra. Some people have not really cared because obviously we're trying to make our small businesses survive. But there is a responsibility to inform the consumer that they're being charged a surcharge. So I wanted to bring this up to the committee, that this is something that's happening. I'm not aware of any policies or parameters that have been, created around this issue. But thought if this is something that we're passionate about, that we could put together a resolution that, asks that businesses educate the consumer of any surcharges as it relates to COVID-19 or any additional charges because of it. Any thoughts on this? And obviously, there's a certain thing when it comes to restaurants and retail, but in this article, it was specifically about medical care. So, surrounding PPE, sanitation, things like that, people were not aware about. And then, of course, there were insurance issues with that as well. I just wanted to educate everyone about this. And Susan, you should go first since you mentioned this to me.
Yeah, I was made aware of this, but I have to say, since I haven't, the only businesses I've been going to are, CVS and Trader Joe's, and I haven't noticed any price gouging there. So I actually don't know to what degree it's happening here in the city or here in our district. And I just kind of be interested to see if anyone on the committee has actually run into it or heard of it.
Was that, did they say a rent surcharge, Bill, on that headline? If you can roll back a little bit. Oh, a recent bill. Okay. I thought they said a rent bill.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, part of this again is even if we're not seeing it now, we want to make sure that we avoid it before people start to get into issues with it. So that's one of the reasons I brought it up as well. Jeannie?
This is pretty interesting, and as Susan said, I don't know how widespread this is, but I'm sure it will be. It's kind of like the airlines; they start tagging on, one fee after another, and I seem to think that maybe like Chuck Schumer, this is like something that's like something he's always interested in, consumer protection, and so I'm interested to know more about the data, or as you said, Kyle, like just to keep on top of this as time goes on, right, because we're so early in this, but I can see this becoming a big problem.
Right. Yeah, and again, any potential resolution would be about not eliminating the surcharge, because obviously some people need to do that to survive, and it's more about consumers being informed of it and having that right to make a decision before they engage with a business. So that's really what it would be about, is just making sure that any business that does choose to provide, include a surcharge, ensures that the consumer is aware of it before they engage in any business practice. It's very similar to, those like mandatory tips. If you have a party of I think it's like 6 or more, an automatic tip of I forget what the percentage is. It's been so long since I sat down in a restaurant, but the surcharge, you're aware of it before you actually sit down and purchase the good or the service. So making sure that it's more about education than it is about a policy idea. Seema, I see a comment, and then also, sorry, not a comment. I see a hand up.
I've been trying to make myself pretty knowledgeable about what the small business kind of issues are, because I'm working on something like in my full-time job about it. But I will say that I've almost exclusively seen a surcharge happen with dentists. And that's because the dentists are typically fairly in close contact. It's like and a lot of it is like mouth, like the respiratory concerns, obviously, because the dentist is close to your mouth, their mouth is close to, whatever. So I've almost always seen it in healthcare. I've actually, even within healthcare, only seen it within dentists visits. And I think, a couple of things to keep in mind is that the dentists actually have the most stringent PPE requirements for their patients out of any other medical professional. And that PPE requirements are not reimbursable by the insurance. So basically what that means is that for every kind of safe encounter for a dentist, they have to ensure that each person has their own kind of new equipment. So even if I came in with a mask, they have to typically give a new mask and, other things. So, I just want to kind of make clear that it's with dentists who have very high requirements imposed on their businesses for PPE, and none of those requirements are reimbursable. So if they pay, to buy additional masks, et cetera, they're not going to get any reimbursement by anyone. So I think that surcharge what I've been seeing has been to offset those costs that are not reimbursable on their back end with the insurance.
Right. No, that's a good point. And that also, brings up the, philosophical question about consumer protection. Is that a cost that should be incurred by the patient and not reimbursed by insurance? But Rashma, I see that you made a comment about an experience that you had this. Could you actually share a little bit about it? Were you aware that there was going to be a surcharge before you visited the dentist? Or was there any communications or anything like that for you?
No, I wasn't. So only when I got to the dentist, they had me fill out a form saying that I needed to pay an extra $15 in addition to whatever my copay was.
Huh. Interesting. And your insurance said that they wouldn't cover that?
Well, I didn't ask my insurance. I mean, it was $15 and I was already there at the dentist. It was a routine cleaning. So it's something that insurance generally covers. So I usually don't pay anything. But I just paid it because, it had said it was for the PPE.
And Rishma, did they give you like PPE when you got there that was just your use or anything? Did they?
No, they didn't give me anything. I mean, I had my own mask and gloves on that I, kind of walk around with. So I don't know if they would have given it to me if I didn't have it. I just assumed that was for the PPE for their office. I mean, I didn't have a hygienist. It was just the dentist because I guess he's short staffed right now. So he did the cleaning.
Interesting.
Yeah, I guess I should have asked more about it. I mean, I didn't, like I said, it was one of those things where I'm here for this appointment. They asked me for an extra $50. I paid it.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, and that's why, that's why I wanted to bring something up, well, because obviously you said, you know what, I'm already there. This is, and in the grand scheme of things, $15 isn't too much. But it also makes it sort of like vulnerable to abuse, right? If they have a number of patients and they're all charging them, and is 15 the standard, or are some dentists, charging 25 or 30, I don't even know if there's a standard for that. So just making sure that we're proactive in making sure that consumers are protected against what could be predatory business practices.
Yeah, and there's some people who $15 right now, especially, right? It may be too much. The people who are trying to, unemployed and trying to make rent and stuff. So.
I would have left and just bought a new toothbrush.
Shima, did you ask what what was included in the $15 charge? Because masks are only. Oh, sorry, Reshma. The masks themselves are about $1, and I think the face shields can be cleaned and reused. So.
No, yeah, I mean the form it was a little form that they had you sign, and similar to sometimes when you go to the doctor's office where they want you to make sure you make the payment. Right. So it was like that. They're saying, we have an extra $15 PPE, and I had, was it the general meeting or one of it? I mean, one of our electeds, I want to say at one of the meetings we had when they spoke, they talked about how, different small businesses had different issues and how dentists had complained about, these added costs of PPE for them. So I think that's the only reason I was aware of it.
Right.
And it seemed, like, well, I should have known, they should have told me in advance, because they did send me all this paperwork in advance to make sure nothing had changed. I had to fill out, before I got there.
Well, I would think that they should charge their costs. They shouldn't make a profit on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I say, the masks are $1, and probably the shroud that they wear is probably $3 or $4 a piece.
Yeah.
Man, where do they get the extra 10 from? Interesting.
Yeah, and again, I don't know if the costs are standard across dentists. If Reshma got charged 15 and then maybe other people are getting charged 30, and especially if you're, I mean, this is kind of like an intimidation technique, right? Which is to give you a bunch of paperwork when you're in the moment and then just be like, sign it.
My best friend's a dentist up at Columbia. And he's a professor up there. I'll ask him what their protocols are and what their costs are, because that sounds $15 just sounds a little high. And it should, like I say, it shouldn't be a profit thing.
Reshma, did you notice if the dentist himself or herself was more equipped, like had more equipment or protective gear on?
Well, he had a mask on and gloves. I mean, normally, the thing is, I had it, the cleaning was supposed to be in March, but obviously it didn't happen because of COVID. So now I hadn't been to the dentist in September, right? But I don't ever remember, they definitely didn't have a mask on. I don't remember if they wore gloves.
Okay.
Yeah,
because what I've been hearing is that they have like higher requirements around cleaning after each patient, especially because it is like heavy on the mouth. So that's what I've heard, that dentists have been like required to wear more equipment or like protective gear, and then they've also been required, like their cleaning after each patient is more stringent than just kind of like a wiped down with some disinfectant.
And that makes sense, because even in my building, right, like we're doing more cleaning, right, with the the elevators, everything, right? So in that sense, even in the office, if they're doing more cleaning, if they're paying a cleaning person more, or getting them more frequently, maybe that's another reason why they have added cost.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, yeah, just speaking specifically about dentists, it's like my dentist has always worn the face shield and the mask and the rubber gloves because, always sticking stuff in your mouth. But so the only added cost I can imagine is like increased like sanitation, like cleaning up the actual premises than anything else. But it's still interesting. But I would like to put a resolution on this, on just making sure that there are no, predatory business practices, that people are educated about any surcharges prior to service, or even prior to arrival for service, just because I think that this is really fertile for abuse and for, predatory business practices. And it doesn't have anything to do, like this proposed resolution wouldn't have anything to do about eliminating surcharges, but just about the education and informing of the surcharge. Would anyone like to make a motion for that?
I guess I feel that just my take on it personally is that if they are incurring additional costs from that are not being compensated by their insurance companies, like, I understand what you're saying. It's kind of a more consumer education, consumer awareness thing. But if the businesses are getting charged or have to put more work in and aren't getting compensated, like, I don't want to comment on that really, because like that's really a health insurance question.
So again, this wouldn't have anything to do about cost itself, but just about the informing of cost is what I'm proposing to the committee. Matt?
So I'm all about consumer protection. And I'm just wondering what the resolution would be asking somebody to do. Would it be that the Department of Consumer Affairs engage in some activities with respect to preventing this type of activity? Or would it be for calling on our local elected officials to pass whatever laws might be required? Because there are laws on the books already with respect to surcharges and things like that. Don't even ask me what they are, because I couldn't tell you. And I recall, once getting a surcharge because it was on the bottom of my menu in fine print, basically at a diner. And I was outraged, that I didn't know ahead of time that I was being charged whatever it was, like $2. It bothered me a lot, because I looked around and I saw everybody else, and I could imagine that nobody else saw this surcharge on their menu at a diner. So I'm just curious about who we're asking to do what. And then my concern about the whole thing is that because there are already laws on the books and there are already agencies that are tasked with performing this activity or creating laws to enforce with respect to things like this, whether we need to do it now, and what would the cost be to the businesses? Because how are you to inform the people that are coming? So would it be like somebody suggested earlier with the reservations at the restaurant, that you get a text back? The dentists now use text confirmation to make sure, and the doctors that you're coming to your appointment, would it be a text back? And what's the cost of all of that to them? And would it also make then sense to, ask our local elected officials to pass relief for small businesses that call for tax abatements with respect to any enhanced cleaning requirements that they're obliged to undertake given the pandemic? So, it's all very weighty stuff, and I'm just concerned about, passing a resolution where we may not necessarily need one. Although, we definitely need to protect the consumers. I just don't know who we'd ask to do it and how.
Right. So the way that this would work is, because remember, at the end of the day, like, all of our work is advisory, right? So every resolution doesn't need to be to the establishment of a law or something on the books. It can be about something like we're advocating for. So this would be addressed to Department of Consumer Affairs. And as always, our elected officials would be CC'd on this. But it would ask that there be some action taken that would allow that businesses should be required, and especially if there are already laws about this. And I mean, you know, again, if you're not versed on it, I'm definitely not versed on it, Matt. But if they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, there should be, at least in the public conscience, awareness of this issue, which could be brought forth by a resolution. And that would just basically be asking the Department of Consumer Affairs to ensure that any business that's imposing a surcharge due to COVID on any good or service, make that apparent to the customer prior to their purchase of the good or the service. So you're talking about cost to it. So this is something that's actually, like you were talking about, there are already surcharges for a lot of things. You know, I gave the tip example before. That's something that people put on their menus. They can write it up on their board. They can inform people through an online way if they're doing the online appointments only reservation. So the lift for this is not very hard, but the impact of abuse by this could be very severe. So that's what, to me, is the primary concern, is that if this was a big imposing request of businesses to change things, yeah, I think it would, you know, warrant a completely different conversation. But the thing is that this is a small lift, the same way that Rushmore was receiving papers beforehand to make sure that everything was up to date. Could have also included, hey, you know, we're now including a $15 surcharge. For me, at least, and if we're, you know, speaking specifically about, you know, medical care, you know, I get a number of emails from my healthcare provider informing me that there's a charge for a patient portal, that there's, you know, a change to the patient portal, to practices and this and that. There are ways to communicate with us. And I just want to make sure that people are aware of these surcharges, because as you mentioned, there are a lot of people who are not going to notice it, who are going to be taken advantage of. And, you know, whatever the cost is, it might be very minimal to someone, but a lot to someone else, and they won't know. Or they might not say something because there might be social repercussions to it. They might not want to seem like they're fighting over $15, or there are people who it means a lot to. And, you know, then you have a back and forth where someone might have gotten the service or product and then says, I wasn't informed of the, you know, the surcharge. So I think it's a relatively low-hanging fruit resolution where we would just request that consumers be informed of any price changes as it regards to any surcharges. But the lift wouldn't be that hard. It wouldn't be about commenting on the surcharge itself or eliminating it or anything of that nature. It would just be informing the consumer of it. Yusuf, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I would just second that or agree with that. We don't have to stipulate that it be done, you know, 48 hours in advance, or that anything above a certain threshold is unfair. And I think the resolution can be written to get either DCA or Attorney General or whoever we would lead with to enforce consumer transparency and education laws. You know, it can be as simple as having a sign up that says we have a $15 surcharge because of cleaning. We want you to know ahead of time. So I would be in favor of that.
All right, Susan, and then Jim.
Yeah, I was just going to say, since I was the one who brought this to your attention, if the committee decides we should do a resolution, then I'm volunteering to write it.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Jim?
I just wanted to say that it's particularly pernicious for physicians or dentists to do this, because generally if you show up at their location and you don't take the appointment, they're going to charge you the $50 or whatever cancellation fee they have. So it needs to be, it needs to be told to them, you know, they need to communicate it before you confirm your visit somehow, whether it's through text message or, you know, Mr. Collins, are you coming for your appointment tomorrow? Just a reminder, by the way, we're charging $15, you know?
And
it's a good point.
Suggest, Kyle, shouldn't we also suggest, because in saying notify people of a surcharge, you're almost agreeing that in some circumstances a surcharge might be proper or allowable. So shouldn't we take a position that any surcharge be reasonably related to the purpose for which it's being charged? You know, for example, example, if it only costs the $1 for the mask, and I don't think it's limited to just a mask at the dentist's office, for example, but I do think they have heightened cleaning requirements that they undertake that cost them money. But if the Department of Consumer Affairs are hitting up small business people and pharmacies for charging $15 for a can of Lysol that they themselves purchase for $12, then should be whatever surcharge people are charging should be reasonably related to, which is a little very ambiguous, but again, here you're getting into how complicated some of these things can be. But if we're going to be lending support to the notion that surcharges are appropriate at all, given these circumstances, then I think that we should say something to the effect that it also be reasonably related to the purpose for which it's being charged.
Yep. Agreed, yeah, so that can be written into the language, because the whole idea at the end of it is we want to avoid price gouging of not only the businesses, but the consumers as well. So yeah, that's a great point. You can put that in.
Not only related, Matt, but maybe even like disclosed, like what it actually is connected to.
Right. Yeah. Great point, Seema. Jeannie, you're up.
Hi. Yeah, just a question. What is the, are we looking at the scope? I know we talked about dentists, but are we looking at, say, the surcharges that restaurants are charging for deliveries, or, are we defining the scope of all of this? I mean,
so we're not, I don't want to get into the defining of scope. As I mentioned, I want this to be a relatively simple resolution about consumer education and information rather than what's the root of surcharges. I want to avoid that just because that would vary across industry, and I don't want to get into the specifics of that, but just making sure that, especially with the language proposed by Matt and Seema, that they're reasonably associated, would be, I think would cover that as well. So it wouldn't have to get into the specifics of what exactly is their surcharge on, what's the wholesale cost of something, what did they, I don't want to get into that. I just want to make sure that people aren't being taken advantage of. And actually the second part of this conversation too is about businesses getting price gouged. And we'll talk specifically about the third-party apps, which were charging, fees, which were then being passed on to consumers as well. So we'll get into that too, but I think this is a relatively simple resolution just to make sure that there's transparency and consumer education and protection. Are there any more questions? I don't see any hands.
Jim has his hand raised.
Oh, my physical hand, yeah. No, I just wanted to say that in the reso, you may want to say that any business that imposes a surcharge and also a cancellation fee for not attending should be required to advise the client or the customer or whomever, patient, of their surcharge before the appointment. So, just put that in. Just say require, 24-hour notice beforehand so that they can cancel.
That's a good point. I completely forgot about the cancellation fee. That's a good point.
I would disagree because if that's company policy, I don't all of a sudden want to impose to every business that if this is a company policy that's listed on a website or you fill out on a form, I don't know if I need for it to be brought to the surface again in this context. I think if we're thinking specifically in a COVID context, what are the price gouging mechanisms that we want to target? If that hasn't been called out as a price gouging mechanism, I don't want to lump it in together. I don't think that enhances the message that we're making overall.
I don't know that Jim was saying that he would lump it in with price gouging, but I think it's a good point that if this is a practical, I didn't even think about it until Jim said it, because I've had these issues in the past too, where, I've gone to an appointment and the doctor actually was late and then said, oh, can you push it back? And I was like, I can't do it. And they actually charged me a fee because I said I can't stay the entire day. And of course I fought that and it was waived, but I think there's a good point, but there might be a complete power imbalance if someone's sitting in the seat in a doctor's office and they know that if the company policy is, if you don't go to the appointment, you'll be charged, whatever, $25, or you pay the $15 extra charge that they weren't aware of before.
I totally understand, Kyle. We're entering into the highly regulated territory of financial disclosures around personal health care. And I don't want us to enter into a space where we feel like potentially ill-equipped, or, you know, our message is getting diluted because we're talking about a ton of other disclosures that the business might need to make. Like like if I was putting forward the motion, or I think someone already did, but I would say, like, let's stick to the COVID context, COVID surcharges, please explain, and please, you know, make the consumer aware, and then please explain, because otherwise we're entering into other territories around, you know, disclosure. That, you know, it's like it's a very huge area, specifically financial disclosures.
Is a cancellation policy financial disclosure? Like if they were asked to inform someone of a policy before it happened, would that be financial disclosure?
Yeah, I mean, because effectively what you're doing is you're compensating them, you're compensating your doctor for the insurance reimbursement that he or she would have made. So that's like a highly regulated area.
Okay, yeah, because I'm assuming, like, if the consumer was aware of that policy before, then they wouldn't have done it at all, which would be the same effect. But I mean, we can put together a draft, which includes it, and then we can take a look at it for specific language related to that. So that's a good point. I'm not so aware of the financial disclosure stuff around cancellation policies.
Yeah, especially in a health context, like, you know, my agency regulates health insurance providers. It's like a very dicey area.
All right. Should we take a vote on this resolution because someone put a motion forth on it?
The motion was seconded, right, Kyle?
I don't know if it was seconded. I think, Yusuf, you motioned, right?
Kyle, can I just say one last thing really quick? I really don't think that there should be surcharges at all imposed by anybody related to COVID-19. And maybe the resolution could say that, but to the extent that they're allowed, then the consumer should be informed. I just don't, you know, there's something offensive about the notion of a surcharge at this time, but I can understand where it will come into play because, you know, restaurants, for example, have added costs of having to, you know, protect people, and they may have those added costs of protecting people once they move inside. And I don't know what they are, but I don't know if you should really punish them for having to take these measures, or on the other hand, punish the consumer for them having to take these measures. It's such a complicated issue. And I'm really just, something about the notion of a surcharge at all during this time really rubs me the wrong way. So I would only ask that if there's a resolution that that speaks to surcharges, that perhaps it should be qualified with, we don't believe that surcharges should be charged right now, but to the extent that they are, or they're necessary, or whatever, that then the consumer be informed about it.
No, I get that. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a completely separate resolution on the purpose of surcharges. All this one, I'm envisioning more about transparency of them. And again, I'm not sure that it is a widespread issue yet, but I want to make sure that it doesn't become one. So if later on we start seeing that there are surcharges, and as long as people are informed about it, then we can kind of discuss, you know, more in depth, I guess, more like if that's an allowable thing or if that's an okay thing to be doing now. But I don't think it's...
But the language of our resolution could just be simply add a few words that says something to the effect that if the incidence of COVID-19 related surcharges increases and are allowed by the applicable authorities having jurisdiction over them, then we think that the public should be informed in advance of what they are, and they should be reasonably related to the purpose for which they serve. I mean, it's just, you know, a couple words.
No, listen, I'm on board with you too. Like that's how I personally feel too. I think that would change the purpose of the resolution to add that language, because I think there might be people who say, hey, you know what, like a business should be able to increase their prices over their data service, especially if it means them making it through this, you know, pandemic. Because some ways that people are going to push the surcharge anyway is to probably increase the price of whatever it was that you got. So if something was, you know, $4 before, it might be $6 now. But we just want to make sure that when someone goes in and buys something, that they know what they're paying for and how much they're being asked of them.
So that's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't nature of being on a community board sometimes.
Yeah.
Because if you don't want to vote because you don't want to lend credence to the notion of charging surcharges, and you vote no, then it looks like you voted no against a resolution to protect the consumer against, you know, surcharges. So I'm going to vote for this one. You know, qualified by what I just said, that I really don't think that we should have them at all. But we'll take that.
No, I mean, but yeah, that's true of like any policy or any vote on anything, you know, and that's what I want to avoid. It's like, especially with at least resolutions that go through this committee, it's like I like things to be very, you know, focused. And so, you know, there might be people who vote, they're like, hey, you know what, I hate surcharges. I think, you know, people should be educated about surcharges, but I don't disagree that there is a surcharge. It might change their vote or approach to the resolution, where they say, you know what, I think a business should be able to, in this particular climate, to add a surcharge because of everything that's being asked of them. But I do agree that.
I'm sorry, Kyle, just one last thing. To the extent that, you know, I disagree with the notion of there being a surcharge is because if consumer-oriented businesses are forced to spend more to protect the consumer, then there should be tax relief for those businesses, you know, related to the costs involved in protecting the consumers. So I'm not trying to just shift the whole burden to the businesses, restaurants, the dentists, and everybody else. It's just so complicated that, you know, there shouldn't be any surcharges, but if you have to spend more to protect people, you should be able to take it off your taxes, that kind of thing. Anyway.
No, yeah, again, I'm agreeing.
They can take it off their taxes. They can take it off their taxes. Anyway, it's a deduction.
Kyle, Paige has her hand raised.
Yeah, I see Paige.
Hello?
Yep.
I agree that there should be no surcharges because most people are trying to support businesses. I know the only thing I'm supporting right now are restaurants. And I've been giving very, very generous tips just to make sure that, you know, they stay in business, because when I eventually get to go out, there might not be any businesses, in my opinion. With the doctors and the dentist office, that's something the insurance companies should actually be taking consideration into, because of the fact that they are responsible for services with the dentist or the doctors, and I mean, or a dentist or anybody else. I really can't see.
No, so again, I just want to refocus everybody, because I agree that this is a topic of discussion about the purpose of surcharges, but the resolution we're discussing is about the education and transparency of surcharges. So those are two different topics to me, which I think would be two separate resolutions. Right now, we're just focusing on the education and informing of a surcharge, because it would be a completely different resolution to get rid of surcharges altogether. So to even opine on that, I don't think would be appropriate for this particular resolution, but I am totally open to having the discussion about surcharges at all, which we can actually discuss at our July meeting. But I think first and foremost, because that would be a whole discussion anyway, is to have something down that ensures that we're protecting consumers from price gouging. So I just want to focus on that first, and then I'm open to the conversation about surcharges, particularly during pandemic, at our July meeting. So is there a motion for the consumer protection surcharge transparency resolution? I can't make a motion myself, so if someone can do that.
All right, I'll move. So move.
Okay.
I'll second.
Second.
All right, so it was made by Susan and seconded by Paige. So all of those in favor, please. Oh, Cody, do you have to do the roll call? Sorry.
Should be pretty quick. Hold on. All right, Kyle.
I'm in favor.
In favor, you say in favor. Opposed, abstain, or not entitled. Matt Bondi.
In favor.
Jeannie D'Onofrio.
In favor.
Paige Judge.
In favor.
Yusuf Khalid.
I think Yusuf dropped off.
He was there before.
Yeah.
Has he left? Okay, maybe he had some sort of issue. Kathleen Kelly.
Abstain.
Seema Shah.
In favor.
Susan Steinberg.
In favor.
All right, that's 6 in favor, no against, 1 abstention. And we don't have a vote from Yusuf because he has dropped off. But so that still passes. You had quorum is 7, and that is 7 without Yusuf.
Yeah. I mean, before he left, Yusuf did say he was in favor of it. But okay, so that passes. So the next part of the agenda is actually about the businesses getting price gouged by others. So to begin, I invited Jim to speak because he has a local example of experience with a third-party app. And can you actually, Brendan, can you post up the second article I sent you? So just to provide some context before Jim begins, there was a set of bills that were passed in May, literally right before our May meeting, which one of the bills that were passed was that there would be a 10% cap on the third-party delivery apps, because a lot of these third-party apps are actually, charging very high prices to businesses, and then of course that created problems down the line. So they passed something that said that these third-party apps could be capped at 10% for these delivery fees. And that in some cases they would even be 5%. So this was in response to business complaining and fighting back that they were getting charged over 20% in fees per order, which in some cases either didn't have any financial impact on their business, meaning like it didn't improve it, or it actually hurt them. So I want to just have this discussion, and Jim has is our guest today because he has a local example of something else that was happening on a third-party app, which might be of interest to us. Again, just to address this before, we may not have to write a resolution on anything, but I think it should be important to be on our agenda and to discuss and to hear what Jim has to say from his local experience. Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, there was a, with respect to that 5% and 10%, and then in the New York Times article I sent you, Kyle, there was also a discussion of how some of these apps were doing that, but were just deferring the charges until things got better. So you may, just be on the alert for that. The particular instance I wanted to bring to the committee's attention is a delicatessen near me apparently had an arrangement with one of these third-party delivery services, but then they dropped it. When they dropped it, the delivery service maintained them on their website, but said permanently closed. So anyone going to the internet to find, the telephone number or the menu for the delicatessen would believe that the business was permanently closed. But since it's a deli and a combination grocery, it was open. It was open all through the pandemic and still open. And, they're being misrepresented by these third-party delivery apps, presumably because the third-party delivery app can then steer would-be customers to other businesses that still maintain their contract relationship with them. It is not apparently a unique case, as another instance similar to this was reported out in the Midwest in the New York Times article that I sent to Kyle. So I don't know how many businesses started with these third-party delivery apps and then dropped them because of their costs. Some of them are charging as much as 40% of the cost. But it seems to me a particularly malicious, pernicious means of advancing their business, especially in a time when so many of these independent restaurateurs are struggling and trying to get as much business as they can, to mislead their customers and tell them that they're closed is just, you know, beyond unethical.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jim. And Brendan, could you pull up that New York Times article? I just re-forwarded it to you. Jim highlighted a section in it about this. I think it was in Denver, correct?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. So the issue was essentially that the third-party app was misrepresenting the business, that they would have these, so-called profiles on their app, and instead of saying that they were open to a user, they said that they were closed. They just weren't using that app.
Right. They simply should just drop the company. I mean, just clean out the page for that company.
Yeah,
for that restaurant.
Or
that.
Have something that says, not available on Grubhub or whatever it is. I think it was Grubhub who got sued. So one of the things, at least in my experience, is that I haven't seen too much widespread issue of this, but that also could be, I guess people haven't noticed it or spoken up about it. But I want to throw this again to the committee to see if there are ideas. If we want to put a resolution to this, we could send it to City Council, because obviously they proposed this, cap on the app fees. So we could also ask them as a follow-up to that legislation to ensure that businesses aren't misrepresented on their platforms, and if a business chooses to no longer use it, that they're not misrepresented as being closed or out of business, but are just taken out of the system, basically. So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that or think that's worth it. Again, it would be a very simple resolution if we choose to go that route.
I'm probably going to write a letter to the Attorney General just to make her aware of it. I don't know whether or not there'll be action from her, but it's just it's an ungodly business practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Brendan, can you go to the second page of the article? Oh, yeah, there it is. Yeah, so this is the example that Jim was talking about. So it is, and again, the client is looking for a class action status for the lawsuit, which indicates that it could be widespread. And Jim obviously has seen one of his local businesses suffering from this as well. I see something from Paige. Paige, your hand is raised. Paige?
You're muted, Paige.
Okay. I order out a lot. I try to avoid all Uber and Seamless and all of them. But unfortunately, in the last two to 3 weeks, I've had to use them because there was certain food I wanted, for delivery. Like I wanted a lobster roll, and I called Cousin's Lobster. And I had to use Seamless. And I was annoyed because it was like a $7 charge on my bill extra than what I was getting for one lobster roll. And it really annoyed me. And it annoys me every time I see a charge. I try to only call the restaurants directly. And I explained to them I might have certain preferences and possibly allergies. So, but I mean, these companies are taking advantage of everyone and charging too much. And I think something should do to stop them.
Mm-hmm. Is there anyone else with comments on this? So again, the issue is not necessary. I want to again stay clear away from surcharges. I know people are passionate about that, but it's the idea of a business being misrepresented on a platform as being closed or out of business, when in fact they are. They're just not using the platform. Seema.
I just have a question. What would we feel comfortable putting in a resolution that this, like, would we be addressing, you know, like all of the providers, you know, food service providers, and saying like, please don't do this? Or like, yeah, I guess who would we be addressing? I'm like immediately.
Who would it be? Yeah. Who would be the audience? So again, this could go to a multitude of people. So first, I would, you know, primarily address it to the city council because they just passed. So the speaker, Corey Johnson, because they just passed the cap on the third-party apps, and this is something that's been on their, you know, on their agenda for a while. So this is something that's timely for them. But second of all, because there would be, you know, there are legal repercussions to it, I think it could also go to the public advocate and the attorney general. As Jim said, he'd be writing a letter to them. So this would be the three parties that in my opinion, my personal opinion, would be the primary audience for such a resolution. And again, the resolution doesn't have to go into detail. I know a lot of times with resolutions, we think like we have to think about every single possibility. Sometimes it's just about making the relevant stakeholders aware of the issue and letting them do their job. So I think this could be about, you know, ensuring that businesses aren't misrepresented on third-party apps, and that if they choose to no longer use that app for their delivery services, that they are removed from the system instead of being closed, branded as closed or out of business. Seema, I saw you. Did you lower your hand, or did you have a follow-up to that?
Nope, I lowered my hand. Thanks for the explanation. I'm just curious. I just want to weigh like how prevalent this is versus this being a one-time thing, but it sounds like, you know, the Times picked up on a couple other stories. It seems like it's probably more prevalent than I'm aware of.
Yeah, and again, it's about, you know, like I always like to be preventative rather than reactive. So if this is something that, I mean, it's not something we're like dying on a sword for, or, you know, something that radically changes the system. It's just making sure that we, you know, are protecting businesses from being misrepresented and then being forced into an unfortunate situation. So
they also, just as an aside note, they apparently give a discount to the, you know, to McDonald's or Five,
like the corporate restaurants.
Yeah, they give it to the large chains that they don't give to the independent restaurant. So I don't know how your committee feels about that. I'm not real big on that kind of thing, but you know, I certainly see the business advantage of it, given the negotiating power of a Five Guys or a what's the other one? McDonald's, any of those guys. But still, it's, you know, everybody's out to nail the little guy, you know.
Right. Okay, and I think this is a step in the right direction. You know, personally, I've just been doing pickup because I don't like to do the delivery services either. I want to make sure that my money is going to the business directly. But like that's been my personal choice. So yeah, I mean, but you know, again, not every small business has the capacity to do that. And in order to, you know, make some money, need, you know, those services, but that should be their choice. And if they choose not to use it, they shouldn't be branded or receive some sort of punitive action, whether it's intended or not, to their business. So I think it's something simple that can be written up just to make sure that, you know, as a follow-up to their previous action with third-party apps, if any business chooses not to use it, that they be removed from the system rather than being branded as closed or out of business.
All right.
Is there any questions or comments about that, or a motion for such a resolution?
I'm happy to put forward a motion to resolve to, write something focused on, restaurants' use of apps.
Okay. Yeah, and I can draft it. So if you're afraid of speaking up because you'll have to write a resolution, don't worry about it. All right. So there was a motion from Seema. Is there a second from anyone? Paige, is that a second?
Yes.
All right. Seconded by Paige. Cody, can we do the roll call again?
Sure.
Kyle, if you need a hand with that, I'm happy to help as well. If you take,
definitely.
If you take anything from the farm club.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like your hat. I like your hat, Jim.
Oh, thank you. That's Veniero's.
You're making me hungry.
All right, Kyle.
Cody,
it's to cover up my crappy hair.
Matt Bondi.
In favor.
Jeannie D'Onofrio.
I'm in favor.
Paige Judge.
In favor.
Has Youssef returned?
I don't see him.
Kathleen Kelly.
In favor.
Seema Shah.
In favor.
Susan Steinberg.
In favor.
All right, that's 7 in favor, no opposed, no abstentions.
Very good.
Do we know what happened to Reshma? Because I saw her. Is she still on?
She is, but Reshma's not part of the committee.
Oh, I see. Okay. Sorry, Reshma. Yeah. Okay.
She's just
Thank you, committee. I appreciate your support.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim. No, thanks for bringing it to our attention. I appreciate that.
Very good. I'm going to tally ho. Take care, everybody.
Okay.
Have a good
Enjoy your night.
Take care. Bye now. Bye.
All right, everybody. So we're at the end of the meeting. Just a quick chair's report. So first things first, as I mentioned, we're continuing our partnership with Manhattan Community Board 8 on a series of workshops. We've had 2. The first one was at the beginning of the month and focused on some of these public health guidelines. The second one was on legal rights. So legal rights of business owners and the workers is what it really focused on. So we're continuing with that as well. The next one is on July 2nd, and it'll be focused on the community. So kind of, related to what we're talking about with like consumer rights, but really just about, about behaviors and questions and confusions people might have about how things are reopening. That's the focus of all of this. So I encourage everybody to attend. All of the information, the flyer is coming through the board office, so you'll see it in your Wednesday email, and you'll see it on our social media as well. So I really encourage everybody to attend. They've been going really, really well. They've been moderated by the president of the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce, and she's done a phenomenal job. So I would really encourage everybody to attend. And they've all been at least an hour or less, so much quicker than a BASA meeting. So I'd encourage everybody to attend. There's a lot of good information and a lot of great questions that are being asked in that. Second point is, Brendan, can you bring up the link that I sent for my chair's report from the Beta NYC? All right. So as everyone remembers, we created that Airtable of all of the open businesses in our district. We also had our training from Beta NYC about all of the data that's been put together. You might have seen this for other neighborhoods, but Beta NYC has been really great in doing maps for each community board district. So right here we have a prototype of our district of all the open businesses, and there are a number of different filters that will be added to this. So you can see the legend on the right-hand side, which are grocery stores, restaurants, etc. And some of the filters that will be included will be minority-owned businesses, LGBTQ-owned businesses, minority LGBTQ businesses. So really getting into detail about which businesses are in the neighborhood and which are reopening. And this can serve as a tool for people who want to go out and support local businesses, and for businesses who want to get on people's radars that we're open and open for business. This is a great tool. So over the weekend, we're working with Beta NYC to make sure that it's complete. But I wanted to share with you all the prototype and how it can be used. And I think we're all familiar with how this uses. You can zoom in and zoom out. On the left-hand side, you have different categories. You can also search businesses by name. And then again, this is a continually evolving platform. So we will continue to add businesses as we hear more of it. So If you're in your local neighborhood, especially for, like as Jim mentioned, the small local deli, please input that information. We still have the Airtable available online in the submission form. So please add that as well, and that will be added to this as well. So this can be shared with everybody, very easy to use, and can really help out the small businesses. And I know he's not on the Zoom anymore, but I want to thank Yusuf for his help in putting this together as well. Lots of emails back and forth, but we were able to get it done, and this is just a great tool for us to use. So I just wanted to share that with everyone. And of course, it'll be shared through the board office and social media once it is probably after the weekend when it's completed. So it's now time. That's my chair's report. Now it's time for old or new business. Does anyone have any old or new business to bring up? Or, future topics that you would like, BASA to focus on? I know there's a lot going on. Please raise your hand if you have any suggestions. All right. Seeing none, I am adjourned. Yep.
You'll see in the chat, I posted a link to an event that the Office of a Nightlight is organizing tomorrow. This will be on our information.
Oh, is this the 2 p.m. meeting?
Yes.
Yeah.
Be on our website as well. If you know anyone who, any small business owner who's looking for more information about the Open Restaurants program, or just general reopening guidance, you should encourage them to attend this. We also have a page on our website, which is now live on open dining, more information on how you can apply for the open dining permits and all of that. And I'm going to put that in the chat as well.
Cody, I think your other link broke. So it some of it, I don't know why, some of it did a hyperlink.
It was a bit.ly, and then I copied it and it gave me the whole thing. Hold on one second.
I can try. I sent it in an email earlier to Molly, if I can get it.
Here's the CB6 Open Restaurants page. I posted that. Let me see if I can get a better link for this event tomorrow.
Oh, same thing happened to me.
This link doesn't work? Because I just opened that in a new tab and it worked.
It's a WebEx, if anyone is familiar with that.
I don't know why it didn't work for me, but it says service unavailable. But
it's bit.ly/reopening town call.
Yeah, and I'll be on this Zoom as well. It's at 2 p.m. and it actually, following up our discussion on enforcement, this is one of the reasons why this is popping up for everyone. So the Deputy Commissioner for Environmental Health will be on it. The Director of Public Space from Department of Transportation will be on there. The Executive Director of the Food Service Industry Partnership will be on there as well. The Executive Director of the New York City Office of Special Enforcement, which is an office, will also be there. So this will be great. So I'll be on it as well. And just from, previous citywide Zooms that I've been on, I know that'll be a lot of, questions and discussion on all these topics that we were discussing about enforcement and social distancing, and then why have social distancing at all. So it'll be very entertaining. So if you have time tomorrow afternoon, please do join. Anything else, Cody, from your end?
No, that's all. I just wanted to share those, and we're going to put that information on the CB6 events page, and we'll make it a little pop-up on the homepage as well, so that should alert folks.
Awesome. Thank you. So with that, I'm adjourning the meeting at 8:37 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for sticking through. And just a reminder, I'll figure out the agenda